At this time, we're going to have the hearing on the agency budget for the Department of Children and Families. And at this time, we'll have Amanda Prosser, KLRD budget analyst, give us an overview.
Hello, everyone.
Morning. Still morning, I guess.
Yes, good morning. Absolutely. So yes, good morning. I'm Amanda Prosser with Legislative Research. I'm going to give a quick overview of the budget for Department of Children and Families. Thankfully for us, we have fantastic individuals behind me from DCF, including Secretary Laura Howard, Deputy Secretary Dan Lewin, Deputy Secretary Tanya Keys, and Budget Director Tammy Tompkins. And I assure you they will be happy to come up and correct anything that I misspeak on. So in front of you, you have the KLRD budget analysis. As all of you are aware, this gets to be a quite massive document. So today I'm going to really hit on just some high points, and then Secretary Howard does a great job of going through their interpretation of the GovRec and their wants and needs. So the first few pages provide an executive summary for the agency, but where I want to start this morning is on page 5. This page includes a nice list summarizing the SGF only appropriations that were made last year. Hopefully, as you read through this list, much of it rings a bell. That's everything from last year. Next, I want to flip to page 6, where we're going to dive into the details of the current year. On the top of this table, you can see the legislative approved amount is $870.6 million all funds and $432.7 million SGF. The SGF amount includes just under $27 million in reappropriations. These SGF reappropriations occur for a variety of reasons, I'm told, including delayed IT projects, misalignment between state and federal fiscal years for grants and contracts, as well as the agency's own efforts to save money. On this table, if you'd like, I encourage you to take a pen and mark next to item 1. Mark page 19, because later, if you're interested, page 19 has a detailed list of how they plan to spend those SGF reappropriations. So if you're curious where that $27 million is going, that's on page 19. But right now, just sticking to page 6, we're going to focus now kind of on the middle of the table. So item 2 is showing that the agency's revised estimate includes 1.1 million SGF to account for the shortfall in appropriations for the legislative pay plan from last session. This is the only additional SGF request for the agency for 24. Moving down the table, items 3 through 8 are calling out some additional expenditures, all from federal funds. Thinking about the overall timeline of the agency's budget for 24 was initially crafted and submitted all the way back in the fall of 22, and then was approved by last year's legislature. So here, this is just showing that they have greater than planned federal expenditures in those items 3 through 8. So item 3, the agency has some additional expenditures from the Federal Child Care and Development Fund for child care quality and child care assistance. Most of this is federal pandemic money that was available to the agency, and so most of that is not included in 25. Item 4, the agency adds additional expenditures for the Utility Assistance Program. This increase is due to the 2023 season for the Low-Income Energy Assistance Program extending into fiscal year 24. There's also some additional assistance for their water program that they offer. Item 5 is an add of $18 million for the agency's community resource capacity grants funded by the SPARK task force. And I apologize I didn't get to this to the committee ahead of time, but I do have a list, Chair, if it's okay to pass out, that has the planned expenditures for that $18 million for the community resource grants. Item 5, if that's okay to pass out. Yeah. So again, that just covers item 5, those community resource grants, who's receiving those. Item 6, the agency is adding additional $10.1 million from Title IV E funds, mostly to support IT projects. Item 7, the agency adds $6.9 million in their budget expenditures for various other prevention and protection services programs. That includes Families First, Safe Families, Care Portal, and Cary Park. Item 8 is just a sum of all other adjustments in a variety of smaller programs, including additional Social Security, disability insurance, rehabilitation services, and supplemental nutrition assistance funding. You can also see that overall, the agency had a net increase of 13 positions. The agency has said they continue to phase out the number of pandemic-funded positions. It's just been at a slower rate than anticipated, which is why it's slightly higher than what it was approved for last session. At the bottom of the table, you can see that the governor and Division of Budget concur with the agency's revised estimate for '24, but does give increases for the human service caseload process. This includes an increase of $200,000 for TANF. The number of cases is continuing to decline based on a variety of pieces of legislation over the years, but the rate of decline is just slightly slower than projected, so that's why we have to add in just a little bit more money there. For perspective, 10 years ago, the average monthly caseload for TANF was around 14,000 cases. Last fiscal year, the monthly average was around 6,000, so still trending down. Item 9 shows additional funding required for foster care in 2024. That increase is primarily attributable to the agency's policy decision to amend their case management contracts to allow those case management organizations to cover actual costs in '24 with savings recognized from prior years. The need for increased funding, though, is slightly offset by some additional foster care federal dollars the agency is now receiving. This is a bigger deal in '25, but it is occurring somewhat in '24. And what's happening is there was a federal rule change that allows DCF to use kin-specific licensing standards for a child's foster home placement. My understanding is that previously a child may have been placed with a family member or kin in a non-licensed foster care arrangement. This can be an acceptable arrangement for the child, but that family may never have wanted formal licensing as a foster care home, so then that agency couldn't pull down federal dollars for that child. They had to use state dollars. And so now with the change in rules, that's that individual that is in a home placement is going to have different licensing standards. And so they're hoping that more of those individuals will become licensed, which will allow more federal dollars to help support that child versus state dollars. So as that relates to the budget, there was additional need for foster care dollars because of what I said about case management organizations needing extra dollars and they're letting them use savings from prior years. But that need is slightly lessened because of those federal rule changes that I just described leading to additional savings. And a lot of that you're going to see in 2025, and I'll mention it again when we get there. I think that covers everything I was going to touch on for 24. I'm happy to stand for questions, madam, or I can move on to 25.
I do have a question. How hard would it be to pull the statutes that occurred half a dozen years ago or so on the TANF?
Get this right.
That has caused that to be reduced?
Yep.
Thank you. Senator Petty?
So it looks like items 3, 4, 5, and 6, are they all federal dollars?
Okay, you can continue.
Thank you.
Okay. So now we're going to jump ahead. We're going to look at a very similar table, but for 25. That's going to be on page 11. If you want to flip there. So here, about 2/3 down the table, you can see that the total agency request for 25 is $906.8 million, including $430 million SGF. This is an all funds decrease of $110 million from the agency's revised estimate in 24, including an SGF decrease of 11.1 million. The request itself is divided into kind of two chunks. The first 13 items that you see in that table are the enhancement requests from the agencies. And then items 14 through 18 show some major changes that were seen in the budget, including a significant decrease in expected expenditures from federal funds and the end of reappropriations. And then the bottom chunk of that table shows the governor's recommendation. And you can see that I've lumped together the net dollar amount for the enhancements either not recommended or partially recommended by the governor, along with some additional changes that came out in her recommendation. And so how I'm going to speak through this, I'll go very briefly because I know Laura Howard does a great job of covering it. But we'll go through kind of 1 through 13, which are the enhancement requests. And I'll kind of note as I go through them which have been included in the GovRec and which have not. And if you like this table, you can stay here. You can also look at page 15. Sometimes that's a little bit easier. Page 15 is going to show those enhancements again for 25, but it's going to have what the governor recommended right next to it. So if that's a helpful table to look at. Regardless, I'm going to go in the same order. So the first one is the CWIS request. They requested $21.4 million to continue the development of that comprehensive child welfare information system program. I think Secretary Howard has described last month, they've got 11 bidders for the design, development, and implementation RFPE. They're hoping to award a contract next month. Previously, it was projected at 12.5 million state general fund. Now the ask is 10.7 million SGF each year. And ultimately, the governor did partially recommend that enhancement and funded it at 8.5 million. The next item on that list is assistance for the vocational rehabilitation services. Two things are happening here. The agency is seeing an increase in the adult caseload for these services, but they've also received federal notice that they need to maintain spending 15% of their funding on youth. So this request would help assist both with the caseload increase and then maintaining that 15%. The governor did recommend this. Next, the agency is requesting $350,000 all funds to fully fund and continue the Can Coach program with the Children Alliance of Kansas. This is the professional development program started at KU, but has since been transitioning to Children's Alliance. The legislature did appropriate money for this in '24, and it is included in the base budget of DCF. This ask is for an additional $350,000 that would effectively fully fund that program. So on top of what was done last year. Next, the agency's ask is to fully maximize the state match for the Child Care and Development Fund for 25. Initially, the agency ask was a little high, and the governor's recommendation is just a more precise amount. So she is partially recommending that enhancement at 6.8 million all funds. The agency will be using this money to reduce the cost of child care for low-income families within their child care assistance program. Next, the agency requested, but the governor did not recommend, $1 million in expenditures, including just under $503,000 for the state's portion of administrative expenses tied to providing SNAP benefits to eligible families during the summer months. This would be in the summer of '25, and the governor did not recommend this. I would point out, though, when I mentioned on earlier how the agency is spending their reappropriations, the agency is using some of the reappropriated funds for this purpose in '24. What you're seeing here is for '25. Next, the agency requested, and the governor did recommend, $500,000 SGF to fund the expansion of Foster Adopt Connect into Wichita. Next, the agency requested 1.6 million all funds and just under 767,000 SGF to fund administrative costs for several of the agency programs. It's been discussed, several costs are going up, including postage, primarily the employment verification contract they have with Equifax, administrative hearing fees, and software licensing fees. Previously, the agency covers these costs with reappropriations. They hold some positions open. They might find some small savings in other programs. The governor did fund this enhancement request using some of those SGF savings that I described earlier with the licensing of relative foster homes. So some of the SGF savings from that is helping to fund the operating expenses. Next, the agency requested $2.5 million to establish 5 additional family resource centers. These sites were initially started with one-time federal funding, which ends in September of '24. So the agency is seeking SGF to continue supporting the 9 established sites, but also then supporting 5 additional ones. Ultimately, the governor recommended $1.25 million SGF to provide grants to just the current centers, no expansion. Next, the agency requested $300,000 SGF for the Kansas CASA Association. This money would be used to ramp up their volunteer recruitment efforts, including hiring an outreach coordinator to recruit volunteers at local CASA programs. The governor did not include this in her '25 budget, but I would point out that that Spark list that I gave you for their community resource grants, $375,000 went to Kansas CASA and $125,000 went to CASA of Johnson and Wyandotte. Next, the agency requested funding for the Kansas Children's Cabinet to continue maintaining the child care workforce registry. This was initially developed using pandemic funding, but the agency now is looking funds to kind of support the ongoing maintenance of that system. The agency initially requested SGF for this, but the governor recommended using CIF, the Children's Initiative Fund, for that instead for '25. Next on the list, the agency requested, but the governor did not recommend $700,000 and 2 FTE for the Kansas Commission for the Deaf of Hard of Hearing to help expand the capacity of state agencies to provide communication access for the deaf and hard of hearing. Next, the agency requested, the governor approved, $1 million SGF increase to the base funding for the 10 centers for independent living in Kansas. And I may or may not have corrected a typo from earlier on in the text of this document. That's going to result in $100,000 going to each center, not $1,000, which was the typo. And then lastly, the agency requested, the governor approved, $1 million SGF in assistance provided as post-adoption grants. This money is to help families who have adopted a child and then may face additional struggles as the child goes through adolescence. So if you're looking at the table on page 11, this is going to be most clear here. Everything I just described is effectively wrapped up in items 19 and 20 on this table. So items 19 and 20 show the sum of enhancements not recommended and then partially recommended. Additionally, on this table, you can see some other things that came out in the governor's recommendation. Item 21 is showing a shift in funding. The agency had planned to use $3.2 million from the Children's Initiative Fund for the agency's family preservation services. However, following the recommendations from the Kansas Early Childhood Transition Task Force, this expense has been shifted to state general fund. But that program as a whole, so family preservation services, now they're fully funded with state general fund, and it's approximately $12 million total. Item 22 is a recommendation from the governor to add $15 million state general fund as a one-time enhancement for child care sustainability grants and workforce support. Last month, I believe I heard Secretary Howard say that over the course of the pandemic, over $283 million in federal funding was provided to the state for child care providers to help offset costs during the pandemic. This $15 million state general fund that the governor recommends would help kind of continue those provider grants. It would fund approximately 3,500 providers at an average of $4,200 per grant. And lastly, items 23 and 24. Both are a part of the foster care caseload process. Item 23 reflects the consensus group estimate for foster care caseloads, including both a small SGF savings and an additional federal fund expenditure primarily related to what I mentioned earlier about the change in licensing standards. Item 24 is showing that subsequent to the Human Services caseload process, the GovRec is anticipating an additional $3.5 million in SGF savings for that same reason. However, there's one very important thing I want to mention with those two items, and that is because it's a very loose estimate, very, very loose. Because what's happening through the caseload process, DCF was still in negotiations for the case management contracts. So prior to the end of session, these numbers are going to change, and frankly, they're going to go most likely increase because those contracts are going to become finalized, and so we'll have more details in the spring, in a couple of months. I don't have a lot more to point out other than in the back of the budget analysis, the capital improvement section, they do have a $200,000 request for expenditure to replace the roof at the Topeka Service Center. That went before Joint Building Committee early this year. It was recommended. It's funded out of the Project Maintenance Reserve Fund. And with that, I'm happy to stand for any questions for 25.
Any questions for Amanda? Senator Petty?
Amanda, in the enhancements on number 10, the one with CASA, you mentioned that they got dollars. Were those dollars, did they get those in 24?
I couldn't speak to well, yeah, I can't speak, I guess, to 24. Sorry.
I mean, they were.
So those would have been the community resource grants in 24, correct? I couldn't speak to when they have to have those expended by, if that extends into 25, I'm not sure.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right, thank you, Amanda. Next we have Secretary Laura Howard, Kansas Department of Children and Families. Welcome.
Secretary Laura Howard, DCF. Thanks for the chance to talk about the DCF budget today. As with KDADS, I won't go through this entire packet. You're pretty familiar with our organization. So, page 4 just gives a graphic of our major programs, which, as you know, are the prevention and protection child welfare programs, the economic and employment support programs, child support services, and our vocational rehabilitation services. So I will skip through some of the descriptions to those programs, and I will move you all the way over to page 10, which is just a very brief graphic related to the 24 budget. I mainly stop on this page just briefly to point out the reductions in the pandemic funding. Our budgets looked a little skewed for a couple years. You can look at the bottom line on that page that in 23, we spent about just under $250 million in federal pandemic funds, primarily related to child care. That goes down to $100 million in fiscal year 24, and you'll see then virtually gone, except for about $1 million in fiscal year 25. And there's some more details on those federal pandemic funds on page 11. I won't go through those. I think we talked about that quite a bit last year. You can see from that table that, the largest of those were in 2 different categories related to child care. We then just have a number of graphics about the expenditures of our funds. So I will actually move you over to page 17 to talk just about the fiscal year 24, focusing on the state general fund changes. I think Amanda did a good job talking about some of the federal funding shifts, but again, in terms of fiscal year 24, the primary new item of state general fund you see in the budget is just the pay plan supplemental for the shortages. We didn't have other supplemental requests. So I'll primarily then focus on fiscal year 25. Again, we have a number of pages of charts and graphs. You can really see the impact on our budget on page 18 when we had a budget over the last couple years that was into $1.2 billion. We've now gone back down less than that to $941 million with the reduction of those pandemic dollars. Continue to have just over 50% of our budget from federal dollars. So getting into just the bulk of the budget itself, I will move you over to page 24. So in terms of budget additions for fiscal year 25, Amanda did a good job of talking about the caseload impact in foster care, the $2 million reduction, and I'll get more into that a little bit later. And then the governor recommended about $31 million from the state general fund for enhancements. And then there's also a governor's budget amendment that I'll talk about as well. So the next page gives you just a listing of those enhancements on page 25. And then I'll just kind of jump right into those. The first enhancement is the Comprehensive Child Welfare Information System. I have some detail for you on page 26 and 27. We've talked about this for a number of years. When I came back into this role a few years ago, you very graciously provided the planning funding that we needed to kick off the planning work through all of the federal approvals. But we are now at the stage where, bids are out for that comprehensive system. Bids have closed. We are reviewing proposals from 11 different bidders, and we expect to make an award in March. So we're excited about that. Based on those estimates, the governor has funded 8.5 SGF within our budget and 17 million all funds. There's federal match for this, and that would need to be sustained over a 4-year period. Again, as you'll recall, this will replace 5 existing legacy systems, connect with our contractors. So we're very excited about that. Again, a little bit more detail on the pages, but the primary focus is the fact that we actually have bids that are closed that we're reviewing right now for the development of that project. So the second enhancement that the governor funded is on page 28. And that's the expansion of Foster Adopt Connect grants into Wichita. And you might recall, I think Foster Adopt Connect has come and talked with this committee a number of times. They offer great programs and services to families in crisis, really focused on reducing the need for foster care. And they really target their services to specific communities. They currently serve 2 counties in the Kansas City region and 5 counties in the Southeast region. This enhancement would provide them some support to begin to move services into the Wichita area. We're excited about that because, Wichita continues to have the highest percentage of children in foster care statewide per population. And so we're very excited about some of the work that they can do in Wichita. The third enhancement that the governor funded is support for family resource centers. I mean, we talk a lot about prevention. Family resource centers move kind of even more upstream. These are community-based organizations, really trusted organizations in communities that support families to identify, access the services that they need to reduce the likelihood of child abuse and neglect. There have been a lot of national studies done about family resource centers and the degree to which they result in reductions in child abuse cases as well as reductions in out-of-home placements. We made some awards in this past year for family resource centers, and you can see a map on page 30 of where those family resource centers that we awarded are located. So what the governor has done is provide continued support for those 9 sites that we awarded with some one-time federal funding. And so again, we're very excited about that. On page 4 is the fourth enhancement. This has to do with post-adoption services. The governor's recommending $1 million from the state general fund to really be targeted to some of the specific needs of adoptive children, sometimes several years after they reach permanency. Families can receive a lot of services initially at the time of adoption, but what we've really found is that sometimes many years later, oftentimes when the youth reach adolescence, there may be some issues that come up. And we've been able to track an average of 93 post-adoption removals back back into foster care. We've been tracking this since 2015, and 71% of those have been like 6 years or later following adoption. And so this is really to be able to kind of reach in and provide support to those families and those youth, and we would do some specialized contracts around those families. It also helps us meet some federally required maintenance of efforts that we need to do on post-adoption or risk losing some federal funding. But I think a really valuable service to families who have adopted a child and then subsequently, again, often in adoption, often in adolescence, some issues come up. Enhancement number 5 has to do with sustaining child care program improvements and fully matching federal funds. This is part of, the governor's overall investment in child care. We have 2 initiatives in DCF. Across all budgets, the governor's recommending a $56 million investment related to child care. This particular one is $2.6 million SGF that would let us bring down an additional $4.2 million in federal funds to make sure we're drawing down all the available child care assistance funds. Again, allow us to continue to support our child care assistance caseload. And we know there aren't enough federal funds to support child care assistance in the long term. So this really helps us to continue to bridge those funding gaps and make sure we're drawing down those federal dollars. Item number 6 on page 33 also relates to a child care investment. And this is a project that we've been working on jointly with KDHE and the Children's Cabinet, and this is a workforce registry. This was initially developed using federal pandemic relief funds through the CCDF. But the workforce registry really helps with the early childhood community in terms of tracking educational progression, facilitating the improvement of supply and quality, and assisting in the assessment and development of child care providers' professional development. So it's really important when one tries to think about career ladders in early childhood. This is a project with the Children's Cabinet. We would actually transfer this funding to the Children's Cabinet, and they would actually administer this under agreement with us. And the governor has chosen to fund that from the Children's Initiatives Fund, so it's not an SGF enhancement. Page 34, the 7th enhancement, staying on childcare, is $15 million in one-time funds to do one additional round of childcare sustainability grants. During the pandemic, one of the uses of a large amount of the federal childcare resources was to support retention of child care providers. So not necessarily developing new providers, there have been other grant programs for that, but to really offset some of the operational costs of providing care during those pandemic disruptions. And I think we've heard from a lot of those providers, even though they were small amounts of money, they really provided a financial lifeline. And as we look at the numbers, we can kind of see how those help to retain and stabilize some of those providers, especially home-based providers. And there's some fear now that kind of the cliff created by those federal funds going away can cause more providers to close. So as we're at a time in the state where we're looking at trying to develop new child care, it remains important that we focus on retaining our existing providers, particularly those home-based providers. So again, the governor's recommending this as one-time funding during fiscal year 25. It would support about 3,500 providers with about $4,000 in grants. And our home-based providers, they can't access some of the other resources that are out there through the Children's Cabinet, like some of the accelerator grants that are focused on centers. All right, I'm almost done with the enhancements. We'll move into the area of vocational rehabilitation on page 35. The governor's recommended $570,000 state funds, $2.7 million all funds. These are 80-20 federal funds, state funds. This is both to fund an increasing adult caseload in vocational rehabilitation. These are individuals with disabilities, maybe a new disability, seeking retraining to be able to enter the workforce. and our caseload has been increasing. And obviously, we know we need folks in the workforce. There's a second part of this that has to do with the work that we do with youth with disabilities when they're age 14 to 21 in that pre-employment stage. There's a federal program called Pre-Employment Transition Services, and we're required to spend 15% of our federal voc rehab funds on those youth. So this also will help us to meet that requirement. So again, about $570,000 SGF that pulls down about $2 million in federal funds for those two caseloads. Also in the vocational rehabilitation rehab services area on page 36 is the governor's recommending an increase in grants for centers for independent living. You'll recall that last year, the legislature added about $400,000 in total to support independent living centers. The governor is recommending an addition of $1 million in core funding. Independent living centers, I mean, they do a lot for individuals with disabilities in communities on very small budgets. Again, this would fund $100,000 each for those 10 centers for independent living. For example, we have a neat project in KDADS right now that we've just started with the Centers for Independent Living, where they're going to be reaching out to folks on the PD waiting list to see what kinds of services or supports they might need that those centers can provide while they're in that waiting period. All right, item 10 on page 37. The last actual enhancement from the governor, these were the operating expenses that the governor recommended in our budget, about $767,000. These are really, costs that have gone up. The largest item is the Equifax employment verification contract. I think you'll hear something similar when you hear the KDHE budget in terms of higher costs related to that existing contract. And so the governor provided us a portion of the amount that we had requested for some additional operating expenses. Page 38. Just some other changes in our budget related to financing, and I think Amanda alluded to this. For a number of years, about a fourth of the family preservation budget has been funded from Children's Initiatives Fund, and it's been one of the CIF programs. This year, the governor has recommended that that be shifted back to SGF, and then in the Children's Cabinet, she's really prioritized CIF dollars towards early childhood services. So again, this is not an increase in the family pres, it's just a shift for a portion of the program from CIF to SGF. Page 39, we also had a state general fund savings of $3.5 million. Amanda talked about this in the context of caseload. There's been new regulations that came out from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services that allow us to create licensing standards for relative or kinship placements that are different from the licensing for family foster homes. And one of the things in association with that is allowing us then to claim 4E foster care funds that we weren't able to claim before. So the part of the savings came out in the caseload, but this is the additional amount of savings related to that change. So about $3.5 million. It came in at appeals. The rule wasn't final yet. So again, we're kind of giving back $3.5 million there. Page 40, again, just ask your support for the pay plan when you get to that. I know one of the elements of the governor's pay plan is an increase of employees to $15 per hour. That actually would affect 123 DCF employees, kind of what we call human assistant positions in our field offices that do a lot of paperwork to support our staff members. And then page 41, the governor has issued a budget amendment that impacts a DCF for a family finding system, about $1.2 million SGF, $1.4 million all funds. And this would really allow us to issue an RFP to secure a system that will allow both our staff and our child welfare partners to easily track family data, to identify, contact, engage, and document children's relatives and kin. And it would be required to complement or integrate with the Comprehensive Child Welfare Information System. So that was part of the Governor's Budget Amendment number 1 that wasn't in the initial budget. Madam Chair, we've got some data on caseloads and performance metrics in the pages that come. You can, for example, see on on slide 48, that large drop in TANF connected with the HOPE Act that you referenced earlier during Amanda's presentation and some of those changes. But then starting with slide 50, we just have some updates on some things from last year. I'm happy to go through those or leave those for you to read. That's really at your pleasure, Madam Chair. So, yeah, so those were just some updates from last year's appropriations. Thank you.
Questions for the Secretary? Senator Petty?
You were trying to trip us up because you were saying page and they were slides, and so we were at first
I'm
going.
sorry.
"Da-da-da-da-da-da."
I'm sorry.
But we caught up.
You caught up. I'm sorry about that. I usually work hard to not do that.
I know. So I'm looking at slide 35. It's the increasing the funds for vocational rehabilitation caseload assistance. I just want to understand, you said it was 80-20 federal funds. Could any of those children be on a wait list? And
They could be on a wait list, but still qualify. But what the pre-employment transition services does is it provides, kind of specific pre-employment training. We have particular vendors that kind of work with youth on job development, those sorts of things. So I wouldn't rule out that some of those youth, depending upon their disability, might qualify for example, like the IDD waiver, but they wouldn't all be on that. I mean, this covers all disabilities, so, yeah.
thank you.
Senator Kirshen?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and welcome, Director Howard. My question is, a couple of times you mentioned through the process here that declining federal dollars or the loss of those. Is there a timetable of what happens are we close to that, or looking into the future, is that going to continue? We've got a year.
Yeah, I think you're probably referencing my mention of the federal pandemic dollars. And we actually had a chart earlier on in the document. It would be slide 11, a federal pandemic dollars. So you can see that by the time we get to in this current year, we're still spending out about $100 million in those federal dollars. Out of a total of almost $600 million. By the time we get to next year, we anticipate only having about $1 million of that's not spent. So definitely those pandemic dollars have gone away. So
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Other questions? Okay. Senator Erickson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Secretary Howard. On slide 34, I know that with that $15 million in one-time funds, and I know that it says that it will be targeted at home-based providers, but is there any requirement as to how much will definitely have to go to those home-based child care providers?
Not specifically, Senator. I mean, this would apply to all providers. But recall 75% of the beneficiaries would be home-based providers because 75% of the providers are home-based. So if you think about it in that context, 75% of the resource would be on the home-based side.
That 75% of that $15 million will go to home-based? Okay.
Correct. That's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I have a question on our budget analysis on page, it's the summary of the 25 requests. I don't know if you have that in front of you.
I do, Senator.
Okay. So I just curious, always when we get a flood of federal money, then we have to hire people to administer those programs. As this money is deleted, does the human resource person go away too?
They do, Senator, and in fact, if we look at the If we look at the fiscal year '25 positions, I think that's actually a reduction of 70 positions from '24. And so, no, they go away as well. Yes.
All right, thank you. Other questions? All right, I don't see any.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, we will begin the hearings. And so if you have not been before this committee before, we have a lot of people. We're not enough folks, but we are with KDHE, and we're going to try to get done today. And so please keep your testimony at 3 minutes and try not to read your testimony. Tell us what we need to know from you that you need and why. So if you go on too long, we will have to cut you off and move on. So this time we have Audrey Schremer. How do you say? You can correct me when you get up here. Three River, Kansas Association of Centers of Independent Living. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Audrey Schremer. I am the Executive Director at Three Rivers, Inc., Center for Independent Living, and the Secretary for the Kansas Association of Centers for Independent Living. So I am actually here on behalf of all 10 centers with their permission. We wanted to share information with the committee, a refresher for those that are familiar and new information for those who aren't familiar with centers, that we do cover the entire state of Kansas, and I think sometimes we are the best kept secret in our safety network of working for people of disabilities. So we want to be sure to help spread that information for everyone. Centers for Independent Living provide services for all ages, all types of disabilities, all income levels, and so it's very broad. Individuals with mental health concerns or intellectual developmental disabilities can come and receive services from centers. We're not limited. We have mandated core services that are federal guidelines, which the state has also adopted. And I would like to share that even with our low funding that we've had for the many years, the Centers for Independent Living were able to serve 8,000 individuals. They received one or more of our core services, which are advocacy, independent living skills training, which is the general activities of daily living, peer support, which is unique to services where we help individuals with disabilities, peer mentor others. The project that we usually call transition, but we're beginning to call it returning home project, helping people move out of nursing homes or institutions back into the community, and then working with youth with disabilities as they transition out of schools to adulthood. And information and referral is by and large our most requested service. We responded to more than 20,000 queries for information last year. And as I like to remind people, we know it's 20,000 because we have to enter a log note for every single one we respond to. So it's kind of double the amount of work. And I really appreciate my staff taking the time to do all of that. We respond to other needs in our communities. The CILs are nonprofit, grassroots-based, persons with disabilities ourselves, and our board of directors needs to be at least 50% persons with disabilities. So we respond to community needs. Like, for example, today, Three Rivers is having a meeting with staff, board, and some community members to talk about what goals they would like to face in the upcoming years. Through this, we've come to different projects that we do. Centers help do medical equipment loan programs. We do accessibility consulting. Three Rivers particularly works with our economic development entities to do small businesses that are starting out to help make sure that they're accessible. And the secretary, still a little bit of my thunder, but I'm happy to have it go either way. We are super excited to begin outreach to persons on the physical disability wait list, which you may be familiar. These individuals qualify, been put on the wait list. They have no entity following up with them. And there's about 2,300 people on that wait list, I believe. So we are receiving information through KDADS that will provide the centers with the contact information for the people in their area. And we begin outreach and offer services and supports. If these people can't be located, we'll do our best to locate them. If they've ended up in a nursing institution and would like to return home, we'll do what we can to see if we can make that happen. Not everyone who comes out of the nursing home goes on a waiver. Every year we have a handful of individuals we help move out of institutions who with community sports and some skills training don't need attendant care services.
Audrey, can you wrap it up?
Yes.
I know you have a request that you probably would like to ask.
Yeah, so, well, we wanted to thank, the governor has offered the supplemental for $1 million, which will be divided between the 10 centers. So we want to thank the governor for that. Our request to reach base funding for all the centers would be an additional 1.3 million. And I know that we're very grateful for whatever we receive, but with every dollar we get, we can help so many more people. So, thank you.
All right. Then just clarification, you want 1 million or 3 million or 1.3 million?
Things got a little bit different in our discussion. Once the governor did the supplemental request for $1 million to fully fund the Centers for Independent Living at base level, I believe that we would be at 2.3 million total would reach us to that goal. When we initially entered the information for 3 million, that was gathering data from the SILs that was actually from last year.
Okay. Thank you, Audrey. Next, we have Jeanette Owens, Chief Child Welfare Officer from DCCCA. Welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jeanette Owens, and I am the Chief Child Welfare Officer at DECA, where I've worked in child welfare for the past 20 years. DECA is a nonprofit agency that has worked to improve the lives of Kansans for the past 50 years. And we provide not only child welfare services, but also behavioral health services, traffic safety, prevention, and research services. I'm here today to speak specifically about family preservation services and the reason for our budget enhancement request for the Department of Children and Families. We're seeking additional funding for all family preservation service providers. The House Subcommittee has added $1 million, and we're requesting the same amount from the subcommittee. The additional funding will increase the number of families served through family preservation. With this request, I believe it's important to point out that family preservation has been flat funded for the past 30 years. The funding has been under $13 million every year since 2000, meaning that fewer and fewer families are being provided this service year after year, causing referral barriers and potential timely access issues. Family Pres is a unique service that meets the families with where their needs are at. Family concerns may include mental health needs, substance misuse needs, lack of housing, food, domestic violence, and youth behavior challenges. Our services are provided in the home, and we're in those homes each week and sometimes multiple times in the week due to family needs and ensuring child safety. Family preservation providers utilize evidence-based practices. DECA specifically utilizes one of the evidence-based practices we specifically utilize is called START, or Sobriety Treatment and Recovery Teams. And that evidence-based practice is unique because it provides services to those parents that their primary concern with being involved in the system is due to substance misuse. Another unique part of that evidence-based practice is that we have family mentors that work with our families, and those family mentors have both lived experience through the child welfare system as well as through the treatment and recovery system. I just want to provide a real quick example so I can move into the next individual, but I think it gives a description of what family preservation really is. And we've been talking about this case for the last week because it closed after 4 months. And when we got the referral from the Department for Children and Families, it was a mom that was in a domestic violence situation without housing and having her own substance use needs as well as safety concerns for the children and no employment. And we closed that case successfully by walking alongside that mom last week and help encouraging her strengths and then provide barrier removals for her. So she successfully now has employment, has safe housing, and is on her way through the completion of treatment and into recovery. I'll close by sharing our efforts to continue to keep more and more children out of the foster care system is why I have this request today. Family Pres services have shown year after year over 90% and higher outcomes to keeping children out of foster care. The new Family Pres contracts are just about 4.5 months away, and while we're very excited about those new opportunities, we're concerned that our family preservation services will only be available to about 320 families in each region that we serve over the year. That's 500 fewer families than we're serving today. Kansas has been a leader in additional attention and funding for preventative services, such as our Family First prevention services. But we'd be remiss if we didn't bring attention to the need for family presence services to fill the gaps in services to prevent children from entering foster care. I really appreciate your time today and the ability to share about Family Pres and the funding needs, and I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Jeanette.
Thank you.
Tanya Kane, Interim Executive Director, Child Care Aware of Kansas. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today for the DCF budget. My name is Tanya Kane, and I am the Interim Executive Director for Child Care Aware of Kansas. Child Care Aware of Kansas leads a network of 4 child care resource and referral agencies. Our network is the front lines each and every day, working to connect families to quality child care, partnering with child care providers to enhance their business, and collaborating with communities to build child care capacity. The budget for DCF marks a pivotal investment for early childhood, families, children, child care providers, and communities across Kansas. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about the child care registry, workforce registry. The funds are to go support ongoing maintenance and help ensure the success of the registry. The registry plays a crucial role in supporting professional development, accountability, and quality in the care within the child care workforce, ultimately benefiting the child care providers and the children they serve and the early childhood landscape. I also want to talk to you about the child care sustainability grants. This week, a provider contacted our office to let us know it's getting harder to stay open. With everything going up, my electricity went up $100, my water went up $25, my health care that I'm paying for out of pocket went up $120. And everybody knows that groceries, art supplies are drastic. I think I'm gonna have to go get a job with benefits and better pay. It breaks my heart. Adulting's not fun when you're 51. This is another veteran child care provider out in the rural areas of our state that we are losing. Prior to the pandemic, child care encountered difficulties in sustaining their operations. However, the pandemic just underscored this and the critical need for child care services within communities for the workforce. The implementation of the sustainability grants during the pandemic proved crucial in easing the decline of the child care force and participation in the workforce for countless families. The child care sustainability grants in the budget will assist in aiding providers to sustain their operations and stay accessible for our families in Kansas. I encourage you to fully fund the DCF budget sustainability grants and the workforce registry. Such support directly benefits Kansas families, children, child care providers, and the communities. Thank you, and I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Tanya. Are there questions? Guess we'll just keep moving. Emily Barnes from Education Policy Advisor, Kansas Action for Children. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good morning. Chairwoman McGinn and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. I am Emily Barnes, Education Policy Advisor with Kansas Action for Children, and we are a nonprofit advocacy organization working to make Kansas a state where every child has the opportunity to grow up healthy and thrive. I come to you to talk about the early childhood investments in the budget that we strongly support. Today, I want to focus on our strong support for the one-time $15 million sustainability grants for family child care providers. As mentioned, this would allow around $4,200 for 3,500 family child care providers. We want to make sure that there's accurate information about the experience of the average child care provider so that you understand the dire need for this. Family child care providers are a crucial lifeline upon which Kansas depends for our mixed delivery system of early childhood care. Every early childhood environment is important, But family childcare offers communities in Kansas a nimble and flexible, diverse option to care for their children. Generally, family childcare providers operate 10 or more hours per day without breaks. Quite often, they do not have adequate substitute care. They likely have little to no paid time off, and they may struggle to access health insurance. Operation costs are rising for family childcare businesses, and providers are struggling to make ends meet. Sustainability grants are an opportunity to help them offset the costs that they incur. For instance, when a family childcare provider must go to the doctor, their choices are that they must either close, likely without pay, or they need to hire a substitute if they can find one. In Johnson County, substitute care begins at $15 per hour with a 3-hour minimum. That is $45 per day on top of the costs that they will have to pay for their own medical care. There is also a shared services option within which they may participate that charges $200 per day without a partial day option to utilize the shared services. This is cost prohibitive for most family child care providers, and they are unable to sustain that. Often they don't access what they may need. And so sustainability grants for them are a way to sustain existing providers. Our family child care providers in Kansas are a consistent source of stability for Kansas families across the past decades. They need our attention now, and the investment in their work will return in dividends. I thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and I'm happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
All right, thank you, Emily. Next, we have Mary Ellen Conley, Board President, Keys for Networking, Inc. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. I am Mary Ellen Conley, Board President for Keys for Networking. We are seeking $250,000 to continue our program iGrad, which has been able to provide support for over 80% of to help over 80% of the foster care children graduate from high school. The program began about 15 years ago through SRS. The funding transferred to a federal grant called Gear Up, which was managed by Wichita State University. We worked through that grant for about 10 years. In August, unexpectedly, the program was not renewed. Gear Up was closed down, as was iGrad. We went to DCF to ask if they could continue the program. They advised us, while they knew the value of the program for foster children, they said they didn't have the money. I think we were clearly out of sync with the budgeting process. iGrad combines technology with personal connection. We get the grade cards of 2,500 foster care students every semester. We record them in a program that we've developed and improved over those 15 years. Every semester, we send each student a report of their progress. We send it to the schools, we send it to the foster parents, so that they can review and understand where the foster care child is. One of the problems that we all know happens for foster children is they move from school to school, and often the schools don't communicate. Sometimes the schools don't even know why the child is no longer there. And then the child shows up at a new school, the transcripts don't get moved around, and the students lose credits. And so this program solves that problem for these foster care kids. We collect the data, we analyze the data, we work with all the players, we work with the students themselves. We often find that the students learn how to advocate for themselves in their educational process. We're out of business. We believe that you'll see a decline in graduation rates for foster care children if they don't have this program or something like it, to have that connection between technology and communicating with the students and following their credits. So thank you for your time. The letter attached to it shows what we send every semester to the student, that shows them where their credits are and what they need to do so they can work with their counselors and improve their situation. Thank you very much.
Hang on here just a second. We have a quick question. Senator Petty.
Mary Ellen, thank you for the presentation. I just want to be clear. So Gear Up was a federally funded program.
Yes.
It never had any state dollars involved in it.
No.
And then iGrad.
At first, we were funded by SRS. Then we became funded by Gear Up as a subcontractor to Gear Up. And so it took the cost off the state and put it in this federal program that was a statewide program helping foster care kids in the schools. Now that funding has dried up, and we're hoping to continue the program because we believe it's very valuable.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Rachel Marsh, CEO, Children's Alliance of Kansas.
Chair McGinn and members of the subcommittee, my name is Rachel Marsh with the Children's Alliance of Kansas. I've presented before you before, so I'll go right into our request. Last year, you supported transitioning the Can Coach Workforce Development Program to the Children's Alliance. It was originally a federal grant to the University of Kansas in partnership with DCF. At the close of that federal grant, they started looking to have that be sustained ongoing as it's been proven a successful program. So we came last year and you ended up in conference committee granting us half of the request of the cost of the program. So we took a chance and we brought over the 4 staff members from KU to the Children's Alliance. And we're here today to ask basically for you to enhance the budget this year in the amount of $400,000, which will allow us to build out the full program into the future. What I want to do is answer a few questions you might have about the Can Coach program. What is it and why is it necessary? The history of the confusing parts of the budget allocation I've outlined in my testimony. What Can Coach does is it focuses on the most critical issue in child welfare practice today, and that is, can we recruit and retain high-quality, skilled frontline case managers that can work directly with families in an effective way? Can Coach was designed to build the strengths and skills of our workforce, and they have developed a program that has 2 parts. One is the Can Coach part, and the other is the Resilience Alliance part. I want to tell you a little bit about each side. Can Coach itself is a program where we wrap around supervisors in the Kansas child welfare system to support them through various mechanisms. We do training in a more traditional sense. We do one-on-one coaching. We help them learn how to support their staff effectively. And we even observe how they're working with their staff to provide coaching to them about how to be better and more effective as they do that. It's a 12-month process, and it improves the frontline case manager skills of knowing how to work with families, knowing how to assess for safety, knowing how to process case planning, and helping their frontline case managers deal with secondary traumatic stress in a daily way. That program has proved very successful. Supervisors that have gone through it, who have been around for a number of years, have said, I so wish I would have had this program earlier in my profession. I would have done a better job as a supervisor. The second piece of the Can Coach program is the Resilience Alliance, and it addresses the secondary trauma that happens for case managers and supervisors alike in the child welfare system. It's a peer support model. We teach folks to look for symptoms of secondary traumatic stress and know how to manage them. It also connects our workforce across agencies from DCF to the different providers. And what our hope is, if this enhancement is granted, that we will also can connect into a broader network, child placing agencies and residential facilities. So those programs are so popular that we have a wait list for those programs with the Resilience Alliance. And people will come in on their day off because they need the support to deal with the secondary traumatic stress of working in child welfare. So I don't know if I've taken my 3 minutes, but I hope that you will add $400,000 to the DCF budget for fiscal year 2025 to allow the Children's Alliance to fully implement this program on an ongoing basis. Thank you, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
All right, thank you, Rachel. Committee, well, let me see if there's anyone else that came to speak today on this budget. Anyone wants to speak on this budget, please come forward. Do you have written testimony?
I do. It was
Do we have
submitted, it's
Okay.
the project access,
Okay.
health access. I believe it's this budget. Okay. So my name is, thank you for hearing me today. My name is Carol Bradford. I'm CEO of Wyjo Care in Wyandotte and Johnson counties. And maybe I'm speaking to the wrong budget.
That's what I'm wondering.
I am, okay.
Okay, all right.
My apologies.
We'll just wait, yeah, thank you. Anyone else? All right, committee members, do you have any questions for staff or conferees on this budget? Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is for, I know several groups testified on the child care sustainability and workforce grants. My question is that $15 million, that would not or does not create any new child care slots. Is that, am I understanding that correctly? And whoever would like to address that. Maybe Kansas Action for Children, I've got your testimony.
And go ahead and say your name just for the record. Even
Yes, I'm Emily Barnes with Kansas Action for Children. Thank you for the question. Chair and Senator Erickson, correct, that it's not specifically targeted to open up new slots specifically. However, addressing the need of the fact that if we cannot retain the existing members of our workforce, we will be looking at a greater, more difficult problem to solve. What this, however, does do is as the programs, the existing programs in our state continue to bring in new workforce, that is our workforce that we can sustain and help them continue to grow stronger if they have their peers.
Madam Chair, if I may follow up. And so this is basically a request due to the loss of federal funds that we received during COVID. Is that accurate? Am I understanding that correctly?
I believe so, yes. There were federal funds. However, what was learned was that parents cannot pay more, providers cannot earn less, and there is a gap between what parents can pay for the care they receive and the costs that the providers incur in order to effectively run their businesses.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anyone else? Everybody good? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have another question?
I just have a comment, if I may, Madam Chair. Maybe it's just because I'm kind of new to this whole process, but it seems to me like a lot of these requests, and this isn't directed to any one organization. I think these are all very worthy programs and organizations, but it seems to me like what I fear about having an influx of a lot of federal money is being shown through these budgets, that now that the federal money is gone, the state is asked to step up and fill in what the federal government was currently providing. And also, it just seems to me like there's an awful lot of duplication of effort. I see running through a lot of this, the same type of, family preservation, child care, development. It just seems like there's a lot of duplication and a lot of ask for the filling in of federal funds. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Senator Erickson, you weren't here earlier, but staff did provide us this sheet to show what was awarded in federal monies last year. So, okay, we're going to switch gears and go to the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. And to let everybody know, sometime between 12 and 12:30, we will take a 15-minute break. We have up first Megan Leopold from the Kansas Legislative Research Department. Welcome, Megan.
Thank you. Good morning.
Where is my stuff? Is it in here?
All right, I will be providing the budget overview for the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. The Kansas Department of Health and Environment is broken into 3 primary divisions, the first being public health, which assures the provision and regulation of public health services across the state. The second being healthcare finance, which oversees the state's Medicaid and children's health insurance programs. And then finally, the Division of Environment. The KDHE budget is a bit unique in that it is, recommendations are made across 2 committees. So today we'll only be focusing on public health and healthcare finance. The Division of Environment is reviewed by the Senate Agricultural Committee. One change in this year's budget between these divisions is that in past years, the expenditures for the KDHE laboratory had been in the environment's budget. This year, they were moved into the Division for Public Health. So I'm going to start on page 6. On page 6 is the historical view of state general fund expenditures, and then the table of expenditures and financing across the agency. And then I'm going to move to page 8. I'll be spending most of my time in the fiscal year 24 and 25 analysis tables. So on page 8 is the table that lays out the budgetary changes, starting with the legislature's approved amount in fiscal year 24 to the governor's recommendation. So if you move in a downward motion from the top of the table to the bottom, you can see the changes as they occurred. They all have a number and then corresponding number. Each number has corresponding narrative on the following pages. There were a few adjustments that were made to the amount that was approved by the fiscal year 23 legislature. That was there's a reappropriation of $70 million for fiscal year 24. The main reasons for that, the first was operating expenditures with the Division of Healthcare Finance. They had some contractual expenditures that they were able to use fee funds for rather than SGF, so that SGF was reappropriated. There are also some shifts in human services caseloads, and that was from the membership estimates being lower than anticipated. There is also a slight shift in Children's Initiatives Fund. This was $284,000 that was carried over in reappropriations from fiscal year 23. There is a state water plan change, and that's in the Division of Environment budget. You can see that the agency requested a revised estimate of $4 billion. That includes 891 SGF and 1,783 FTE positions. This is a decrease of $53 million, or 1.3%, and an SGF increase of $969,000. Number 4 through 7 lay out the agency's supplemental requests for fiscal year 24. The first is for laboratory equipment. The agency is requesting $410,000 SGF for water testing. There is a request for $1.5 million, and that includes $383,000 SGF for a new employment data contract. This is the data contract that was referred to by Secretary Howard. This is used by the agency to confirm employment for Medicaid redetermination and eligibility purposes. There is a request for $166,000. That's for the pay plan shortfall that you've heard about in other budgets. And there's a request for $39,000, including $9,000 SGF, and that's for 1 FTE position in the Medicaid eligibility program. The governor did recommend the first 3, the laboratory equipment, the Medicaid data contract expenditures, and the pay plan shortfall in her recommendation. The Medicaid eligibility FTE position and funding were not recommended by the governor. The next items are those items that were changes that were made to the agency's base budget. The first being laboratory construction funds. This is a decrease of 30.9 million. This is just because those expenditures were made in fiscal year 23. They were included in the approved budget, but because they were made in fiscal year 23, they're not included in the agency's revised budget. So that shows as a decrease. There were some contractual services decreases in healthcare finance. This was due to decreased expenditures in the Medicaid program administration. Some of their largest contracts are their Medicaid information system, or the KIM system. They also have contracts with Optimus, which provides their actuarial services. There's a decrease in fiscal year 24, and then you'll see a slight corresponding increase in fiscal year 25. Number 10 shows that there is a decrease in $12.9 million in COVID funds. This is just a decrease in the amount of COVID funding from the public health emergency that is available. There is an increase of $6.1 million, and that is a public health grant that focuses on workforce foundational capabilities and data modernization, or infrastructure as a whole, in the Division of Public Health. There is an increase of $5 million, all federal funds. This is for the Rural Hospital Innovation Program. These are funds that were originally appropriated in fiscal year 23. However, they were unspent, so they were moved forward. $5 million was put into the fiscal year 24 budget, and $5 million was put into the fiscal year 25 budget. Number 13, the small town infrastructure, is in the Division of Environment budget. Number 14, there was an increase of $2.5 million, that's all federal funds. This was money that was awarded through the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, modernization and efficiency grants, and was approved by the State Finance Council in calendar year 2022. I'm going to skip 15, and then 16 and 17 were just small adjustments that in federal funds from the mini grants that are included in the Public Health Department. The agency's revised estimate includes 1,783 FTE positions. This is a decrease of 18.3 positions agency-wide, but within the Division of the Health, it's a decrease of 35.5 positions. The reason for the decrease is deleting positions that are not currently filled and they're not anticipated to be filled. Many of these are due to federal funds that came in with the COVID public health emergency response positions that are no longer needed. On the next page is an overview of the governor's recommendation. The governor recommends $4 billion, and I'm on page 11 now. That includes $852 million SGF in fiscal year 24. This is an all funds decrease of $21.4 million and an SGF decrease of $38.2 million. And that's from the agency's revised estimate. The governor's recommendation includes 1,782 FTE positions, which is a decrease of 1 FTE position, and that's due to the governor not recommending the agency's supplemental request for that 1 FTE position in Medicaid eligibility. Aside from the requests, aside from this supplemental requests that the governor recommended, which again were the lab equipment, the employment data contract, and the pay plan shortfall, the governor recommended an addition of $2.3 million SGF. That's for a data management system for Part C, which is also known as Tiny K. This is a system that will help track referrals, service timelines, and evaluation and billing information for the program. The governor recommended one-time funding of $6.2 million SGF for expenditures that are associated with the furnishing and the moving of supplies into the new lab. The agency has requested $9 million. You'll see that in their enhancement requests for fiscal year 25. The governor and the agency, in between the time the budget was submitted and the time that the governor's recommendation came out, decided that it made more sense to fund part of that enhancement request in fiscal year 24. So you see $6 million here in fiscal year 24, and you'll see $3 million in fiscal year 25. There is a lapse of $7.1 million in SGF. This is funding that was provided, additional SGF that was provided while the KIMS system was being certified by CMS. During that time, the agency was not eligible for any federal funding match, and so it was paid for through SGF. Once that was certified, the agency was able to go back and recoup that, so now that is being lapsed in the governor's recommendation. There is also a deletion of $35.7 million, and that includes a deletion of 39.7 SGF, and that is to fund the human services caseload estimates for fiscal year 24. I'm happy to stand for any questions about fiscal year 24 or move on for fiscal year 25.
Questions for Megan on 24? Let's continue.
All right, I'll have you move forward to page 14. Page 14 is the table that I'll be working from as I move through the fiscal year 25 request. The agency requested $4 billion. That includes $850.4 million SGF for fiscal year 25. This is an all funds decrease of $40.8 million, or 1%, and an SGF decrease of $40.7 million, or 4.6%, below the agency's fiscal year 24 revised estimate. The request includes $42.7 million, including $33 million SGF for several enhancement requests. The enhancement requests are included in numbers 1 through 16. The first one is funding to migrate KDHE asset and hardware management into a centralized OITS service management environment. This is $150,000 SGF, and this was recommended in the governor's budget. Number 2 is laboratory furnishing and moving expenses. This is the one-time enhancement request that I referred to earlier for $9.3 million. This was funded in the governor's budget across 2 years, with $6 million being in fiscal year 24 and $3 million being in fiscal year 25. They requested $951,000 SGF to sustain equipment, staffing, and infrastructure for the new labs. This is ongoing funding, and this was included in the governor's recommendation. The agency requested $1.1 million SGF to provide statewide courier services for laboratory clients for the state lab. This was not included in the governor's recommendation. There was a request for $370,000 SGF, and this is to fund the continuation of oral health programs. The federal grant that's been provided and funding this program in the past ends in fiscal year 24. The new grant is anticipated to be more competitive and narrow in scope, so the agency is requesting funding to continue the programs that have been in place. And this was funded in the governor's recommendation. The agency requested $2 million SGF to expand and maintain family planning services across the state. This includes contraception, chronic disease screening, and preconception health care. And this was included in the governor's recommendation. The agency requested $1.1 million SGF, and that's to maintain the current level of data collection for the BRFIS survey. This is a statewide data collection on a variety of public health topics that the agency provides the state. There's a request for $1.6 million to support local public health programs. This is to increase capacity and the capabilities of local health departments through workforce development and service coordination. This request was not funded in the governor's recommendation. Number 9 is a lead poisoning prevention pilot program. The agency has requested $1.1 for this program. This was not included in the governor's recommendation. Number 10 is a request for $336,000 SGF. This is to purchase 12 live scan fingerprint devices. These are fingerprint devices that are used to, as childcare providers go through the process to become licensed. These new devices will be located in different hubs across the state to increase accessibility to providers in rural areas. And that request was included in the governor's budget. Number 11, the Family Infant Toddler Program. This is a request for $444,000 to hire 3 additional teachers at the Kansas School for the Blind. This is in addition to funding that was provided last year. This was not included in the governor's recommendation. The agency requested $2 million to fund the Kansas Early Childhood Developmental Services to provide direct services to children who are birth to 3 who are deaf and hard of hearing. This was also not included in the governor's recommendation. The agency requested $1.8 million, and that includes $710,000 SGF for 17 new FTE positions in the Medicaid eligibility program. These positions will fall into 3 different categories: centralized credentialing, data, and quality compliance. The governor recommended partially funding this and providing the agency with 9 FTE positions. Number 14, the agency is requesting $6.5 million, and that includes $1.6 million SGF. And this is for the data contract for employment verification for eligibility and redetermination purposes for Medicaid. Numbers 15 and 16 are the environment, so skip over those. Other adjustments within the agency's budget in fiscal year 25 include the reappropriations that were not budgeted. This shows up as a decrease because they were included in the approved amount for fiscal year 24. They were not budgeted for the fiscal year 25 revised estimate. There are also decreases in the Bureau of Family Health and Public Health. This is due to child care pilot program that was funded with $2.5 million SGF in fiscal year 24 that's no longer funded in fiscal year 25. Number 20, there's a decrease of $37.1 million. This is all special revenue funds. This is for COVID transactions. This is, again, just a decrease in federal funds that are available for that purpose. Number 21, there is a decrease of $5.2 million. That's due to the end of a COVID-19 health disparities grant. There's an increase in federal funds for CHIP. This is an increase of $15.1 million in federal funds. This is due largely to an increase in the federal share for CHIP, as well as an expectation that membership will grow in fiscal year 25. There's also an increase of $31.6 million. This is in the contractual expenditures. You saw this go down in fiscal year 24. This is going up by $31 million in fiscal year 25. This is largely due to updates. There are some federal requirements that are required. It's called the Transformed Medical Statistical Information System, and the agency is doing some updates on that. Actually the whole rest of page 17 are all in the budget of the environment. So I'm going to turn the page to 18. The bottom of page 18, you'll see the governor's recommendation. The governor recommends $4.7 billion. That includes $790 million SGF. This is an all funds increase of $758.2 million, or 19%, and an SGF decrease of $60.2 million, or 7.1%. The governor's recommendation includes a decrease of 9 FTE positions, and that's due to her recommendation to partially fund the agency's request for 17 FTE positions. On page 19, number 32 lists out those agency enhancement requests that were not recommended by the governor. Those would be the laboratory courier services, the public health data, local public health program, lead poisoning prevention, family infant toddler program, and Sound Start. The governor partially adopted the Medicaid operations eligibility FTE positions by recommending 9 FTE positions. And then the laboratory furnishing and moving expenditures was fully recommended, but across 2 fiscal years. The governor's budget recommendation does include the migration to OITS ServiceNow, the laboratory sustainability funding, the oral health programs, family planning access, fingerprint devices, the Medicaid employment data contract, and that's it for the Division of Health. Number 33 shows that the governor is recommending 1.4 million SGF. This is to continue the maintenance of the data management system for Part C, Early Intervention Program. The governor recommended adding 1.3 million, and this is CIF funding, and this is for childcare, health, and safety grants to assist childcare providers in bringing their facilities up to code. There is a recommendation in the governor's budget for 1.5 million SGF. This is one-time replacement of federal funds that were rescinded as part of the federal debt ceiling agreements. And these would be in the division or the Bureau of Disease Control and Prevention Programs and would be used to track and combat infectious diseases. On page 20 at the top is number 36. This is an addition of $1 million for testing in at-risk communities. This is blood testing, and communities would be required to provide matching funds. Number 37 is an addition of $4 million in the governor's recommendation. That includes 1.6 million SGF. This is to increase the cost adjustment factor for critical access hospitals. Critical access hospitals have a slight adjustment to the rates that they bill for Medicaid and what they receive for those services, and this would increase that. There was an addition of 50 million, and that includes 10 million SGF to accept the fall human services caseload estimates. The reason for the increase is largely newly clarified federal requirements that require that certain services, personal care and private duty nursing services be provided to any child on Medicaid. Previously, these had been provided to children who were on the waiver. The agency has learned that these must be provided to any child who meets medical necessity, so there was additional funding added to meet that requirement. Number 39, the governor recommended adding 715 million all funds, and that includes 30.9 million SGF, and this is to fund the expansion of Medicaid beginning January 1st, 2025. And then number 40 shows a decrease of 92.6 million. This is to show the savings that would be associated with the federal incentive that gives an extra 5% boost to the FMAP, the state's regular FMAP, for 2 years following the expansion of Medicaid. I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions for Megan? And Megan, are you going to go over the supplementals and other things, or are you finished, basically? I mean,
I'm happy to walk through them. I gave a very brief description of all of them.
Okay, that's fine. No questions? Senator Erickson?
Thank you, Megan. Appreciate it. I'm just a little confused on number 39 and 40. Has Medicaid expansion passed?
No, it's included. The funding for it is included in the budget. It has not been passed by the legislature.
Okay, thank you.
It's our ritual to have it in there so that we can take it out. Okay. All right. Well, I think you want to take a 10-minute break now? Yeah. Okay. Instead, we didn't realize we were going to get fed, so we'll just take a 10-minute break, and we'll get started with the agency after that. Yeah. No kidding. begin the meeting, and at this time, we'll bring up Secretary Janet Stanek, KDHE. Welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having us today, Secretary Janet Stanek, KDHE. I do have a proposal. We have a presentation, but we think most of you have seen it. So we wondered if we should just jump ahead to the finance and budget part.
Love it.
Okay, I thought so. Rather than me read our mission statement, and although we're proud of it. So thank you for that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark Heim, who's our Director of Finance for the Division of Healthcare Finance and/or Medicaid, and that would start on page 14 of our presentation. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I am Mark Heim, Director of Finance for Healthcare Finance in the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, and I can help this along too I'm actually going to start on slide 17, and I just have a handful of slides to go through, and I think I can get through them fairly quickly. Most of this will probably sound pretty familiar to you. So on 17, it starts off, this is the slide that's talking about the main driver of our budget is our consensus caseload, the medical assistance. So we do the caseload process twice a year. There's a spring and fall consensus caseload. Spring, usually we try to keep it to April timeframe. Fall is an October timeframe. And it's not just us. The Legislative Research Department's involved. Division of Budget plays a part in it. The other agencies are KDADS. KDADS has a big piece of it, and DCF, who you heard from earlier, also involved in the caseload process. And we are looking at, the main things we're looking at are the population, of course. That's where the main dollars are. If the population's up, there's more dollars involved, but the number of beneficiaries and sometimes the member shifts, where the members are within the program. Program updates, policies, sometimes you heard a little bit earlier about a policy that was a CMS mandate, so we have to fit those in. We work with Legislative Research and Division of Budget to account for those and make sure they become part of that caseload. Legislative appropriations are part of it as well. And the last bullet point on that page is the federal medical assistance percentage, or what we commonly refer to as the FMAP. You've heard that mentioned a couple times today as well. That does change or can change from time to time. Slide 18 is a bar graph that shows, so there's two lines here. The genesis of this is to show that you'll notice the top bar is titled members. So where's the membership currently? Right now, the bulk of the membership is in children and parent categories. So if you would add those two together, 61% and the 15% gets you to 76%. So 3/4 of the Medicaid beneficiaries are in the children and parent category. The second line bar is depicting the expenditures. So where are the expenditures, or the bulk of the expenditures in the program are in the disabled and elderly categories. If you add those two numbers, the 40 and the 22.21, and you come out just about 63%. So the costs are in the disabled elderly, but the bulk of the population's in the children and parents. Slide 19, there's a table, and this kind of follows what was shown on the previous slide. Again, 76% of the beneficiaries are in the children and family categories. And so the table is showing, it's just a 6-year running numbers for each of the populations down the left-hand side, beginning with the families on the top line, which is the largest, and going back as far as 2018, this one's by fiscal year, state fiscal year. So, and ending with the most recently completed state fiscal year of 2023. Flipping to slide 20, this is a little more detail on the FMAP, so that the federal share that the federal government is paying. And so You're familiar with what was called the maintenance of effort. So during the PHE, we received an additional or states, not just Kansas, but states were receiving an additional 6.2% FMAP on top of your, the regular FMAP, if you met those maintenance of effort determining factors. Basically you couldn't disenroll from Medicaid. So this slide is a little busy, but I'll just direct you kind of to right in the middle. And it shows you in 2019, we had an FMAP, a base FMAP of 57.1%. And then we experienced the COVID years, gained that additional 6.2%. And we carried that 6.2% up until calendar year 2023. And that began what we called, is commonly referred to as the phase down. So through calendar year 2023, we started out keeping that 6.2%, but as the calendar year 2023 went along, it dropped to 5%, then it dropped to 2.5%, and we finished calendar year 2023 with a 1.5 additional FMAP. My final slide is number 21 on the next page, and this is just some details, bullet points pertaining to Medicaid expansion. Megan pointed out earlier during her overview that the governor had added dollars for expansion in her budget, in the governor's budget, and I think she had referred to the $30 million that's in the budget. She also spoke to that additional 5% that the state could draw if expansion were passed. That 5% would be gained for 2 years or 8 quarters, and we are estimating about $92.5 million. So the additional $92.5 that we estimate we could draw, less the governor's $30 million that she accounted for in her budget, that's where the $61.8 million comes out as a win, I guess you'd say, for the state, where we come out ahead on the overall dollars. I think Megan also mentioned it'd be a January 1, 2025 projected start date. There'd be a little work, obviously, that have to occur the current fiscal year and this current calendar year, but January 1, 2025 for an implementation date. And I believe with that, I should point out the top bullet point there. I'm sorry I skipped over it, but the range of estimates have been 370 to 450 million is what is believed the state would gain from that additional 5%. And I believe the Division of Budget has, in crafting expansion estimates, has leaned towards the more conservative side on the 370 million, but there has been a fairly wide range of estimates. And again, that's additional 5% FMAP. So with that, Madam Chair, I would stand for questions or questions at the appropriate time.
Are there any questions? Senator Patty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So looking at this table 21 with Medicaid expansion, so on the conservative side, that would be 370 million more over the next 8 quarters.
Correct.
Or as high as potentially 450 million more over the next 8 quarters because of that enhanced FMAP. And the next bulletin, when you said this would cover the state's share of expansion for 6 years?
Approximately. That's, yeah, I think I have.
I've heard as high as 10. So is this 6 on the conservative side?
Yes.
So the 6.
Well, yeah, that's and I should clarify. Again, there have been a number of estimates. I have mine is in here. Legislative Research helped us out with one. There's been some outside groups that have estimated what that 5% would bring to the state, but it's a fairly wide range. But yeah, for our estimate, we're at the 6 years.
At least 6 years.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Senator.
Other questions? All right, I don't see any. Thank you.
Thank you.
Secretary Stanek, so you're good with, oh, there he is. Okay, sorry. You're welcome.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Dan Timish. I'm the Deputy Secretary of Fiscal Services for KDHE. My slide starts on 27. This is just these next 4 slides are a very high-level financial overview of our funding and expenditures. So starting with the current fiscal year 24 on slide 27, you'll see that we're about a 62% federally funded agency. Primary funding sources there are the federal FMAP on the Medicaid program, as well as the Department or Division of Public Health grants. Our second largest expenditure category is SGF at about 22%. This is the state share of Medicaid, as well as in the Division of Public Health, the SGF funding for both matching federal grants as well as SGF-funded programs such as primary care and Tiny K. The third largest funding source is our fee funds. Down there at the bottom, about 16%. In healthcare finance, this is primarily our drug rebate revenue, but also includes privilege fees and provider assessments and other things in public health. There's a number of fee funds, newborn screening, Office of Vital Statistics has a civil registration fee fund, we have a trauma fund, and a number of others. Looking then on the next slide, again, current fiscal year, our aid and assistance is 89% of all of our expenditures. This is Medicaid and CHIP, plus our public health aid to local expenditures, followed by contractual services at about 8%. The bigger components here would be our Medicaid KEYS and KIMS IT systems and support, and then followed by salaries and wages at 2.6%. So that's at a high level what our current fiscal year looks like. When you switch or flip to slide 29, then looking at next fiscal year, it basically is a very different picture because largely of the inclusion of Medicaid expansion. So you'll see with a half-year implementation of expansion, our federal share goes up, and then because of this 5% on the base population FMAP savings, you'll see SGF going down to the tune of $61.8 million that Mark referenced. And then fee funds is 15.19%. And then on the last, next slide, sorry, fiscal 25 health expenditures, then you'll see an increase related to the half-year Medicaid expansion in aid and assistance, 91%, so a bit of an increase there. Contractual services around 7%, and salaries and wages flat. On the next slide, Megan already covered our staffing, but you'll see here kind of some pluses and minuses when you look at Division of Public Health at a bureau level, but primarily what you're seeing here is a reduction in FTEs relating to the COVID positions where the work and funding came with the end of the public health emergency. On the next page, you'll see healthcare finance. Basically, that increase there just represents the positions that were approved by last year's legislature within the area of eligibility, plus the positions that we had requested as enhancements. And then administration down to so overall, holding the line on headcount and positions with public health emergency coming to an end, going down. On the next slide, on slide 29 here, if there are questions, Megan went over our budget supplements on slide 29 and our enhancements for fiscal 25 on slide 30. If you wanted us to go into more detail than that, Amy Penrod could come up. She's subject matter expert on these. I know Megan covered them at a high level. So whatever your preference would be there on the next two slides.
Thank you, Dan. Questions for Dan? All right. Amy, did you want to add something further?
Amy Penrod, Director of Finance for KDHE. I'm happy to go through any or all of the supplemental and enhancement requests that were covered in, that were included in the governor's budget. Or I can stand for questions if you have questions about a particular enhancement request.
I guess one thing, in 25, on page 30, can you, so we don't have to go through all the backup material, can you just go through there and say what the governor accepted?
Sure. For fiscal year 25, the governor added $150,000 from the state general fund for the migration of our asset and hardware management system to OITS. That will help us make sure that we are managing both our equipment and our software and tracking its use. We also have an enhancement of $3,039,000 from the state general fund for the new health and environment lab. Those are for one-time expenses. And as Megan had said, we originally asked for a block of $9 million in fiscal year 25, but due to the timeframes that we're working with on completing the building and the amount of lead time needed for purchases of equipment and things like that, we shifted some forward. So
So it was 9 total, not, I thought it was 6 plus 9. So
no, it's 9 total. 6 of that shifted into 2024 so that we can order equipment and have that. 3 million is left in 25 so that we can ensure moving expenses and any last equipment.
So you want to just go down the list?
Sure. We have the addition of $951,700 from the state general fund for the new lab, and that's for recurring costs at the new lab. It is a little bit more space. The Department of Administration, our rent will increase once we're in that space, as well as some of the other expenses for IT monitoring equipment, the service charges for that. Next, we have $1 million from the State General Fund for environmentally at-risk community testing. This was an item added by the governor. That will allow us to partner with community partners to test individuals in those at-risk areas. We also have $1.5 million from the State General Fund to continue the Bureau of Disease Control and Prevention Services. As Megan mentioned, this is part of this funding was rescinded due to federal action on the debt ceiling. So our 4th and 5th year of funding was rescinded. We do expect and have been looking to see if there's other opportunities out there, but this funding that's been added will get us kind of bridge the gap.
Let me ask this question another way. Did the governor not recommend any of this list?
Any on this list? She recommended everything on this list.
know.
Okay, perfect.
I'm trying to find out what, through here, without having to go through it, what things you asked for and denied.
Yeah, everything on this list was approved. We did have a request for statewide courier services for the lab. That was not included. We had requested some funding for county and regional public health data. That was not included. The local public health program support, about $1.5 million was not included. Childhood-led program was not included. And then the infant toddler program at School for the Blind and then the program at School for the Deaf were not included. We also had requested a medically needy income limit adjustment. That was not included, as well as a Medicaid dental rate increase that was not included.
All right, questions for Amy? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So have we taken care of your team? Okay, got it. All right, I think, again, everybody's been sitting in here anxiously waiting and enjoying all the testimony. So again, keep your comments to 3 minutes. Please don't read them. And then also, I'm not sure that I announced this, but I'll be making this announcement on the floor at 3 to 3:30. We will not be deliberating on KDADs. We will continue this if we do not finish. So if we miraculously finish, then I'll have a different announcement on the floor. So, okay, first we have up is Lindsay Crowell, Vice President of, oh, he's, oh, no. Okay, no, I thought he was with the department. Sorry. We'll stay in order here. So you'll be next, though. Dennis Kreisel, Deputy Director, Johnson County Department of Health and Environment, and he is via WebEx. So, Dennis, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can.
All right. Thank you very much. So, yes, my name is Dennis Kreisel. I'm the Deputy Director for Johnson County's Department of Health and Environment. And I wanted just to speak briefly to you about a couple of enhancements that are being led by a couple of other organizations that we wanted to support. The first would be in support of the Kansas Association of Local Health Departments, which is a request for $843,493. That's all via SGF. In fiscal year 2025 for aid to local health departments for statutory formula distribution as listed under KDHE's Division of Public Health. You all are probably familiar with that. That's the funding that had remained stagnant from 1992. That's direct financial assistance. And then the last few years, we've been working to catch that up. This subcommittee has been very supportive, and that funding has been deeply beneficial to our department. And so last year, $800,000 was added. This $843,000 would finish up catching this up for inflation and population changes that the state has seen. The second enhancement request that we're backing is the one from Oral Health Kansas. This would be to add $4.8 million via all funds, including $1.9 million from SGF for fiscal year 2025. And that's to strengthen adult dental benefits under Medicaid, specifically to do things like dental examinations and cleanings. I believe both of those organizations are going to talk to you later. So I'm going to stop and just stand for questions. And if it's not an inconvenience, I would like to take the questions now as I'm already late for another meeting.
No problem.
Thank you.
Questions for Dennis? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dennis, thanks for being here. So the number one, the request for the $843,493, that's included in the KDHE budget. Is that correct?
The enhancement amount is not. That one is not one of the items that was either recommended or not recommended. What's in the budget currently is an allocation of $4.8 million for aid to local health departments. So this would move it to $5.6 million. And that's all via SGF.
Okay, thank you. And then the oral health, is that in their is that in their budget as well, or is this an enhancement also?
No, they're both enhancements. So this would be a new benefit. I think that's and Tanya Dorfberner is probably there and will be able to elaborate. All right, I'll defer to her to tell you all the details on it.
Thanks, Dennis.
Other questions? All right, thank you, Dennis. Now we have Lindsay Crowell. Now we have Lindsay Crowell, Vice President of Rainbows United. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair McGinn and committee members. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today. As you are well aware, I'm from Rainbows United in Wichita. We have 11 different programs that we serve children birth to 21. In fiscal year 23, we served almost 4,000 children, and 24 of those, just a little bit over 2,400, were children ages birth to 3 who were served through our Tiny K infant toddler programs in Butler, Sumner, and Sedgwick County. Rainbows provides the Family Service Coordination, which is also referred to in short as FSC, to each of these 2,400 children. FSC is a service that is required for every infant and toddler and his or her family that is eligible for this service. The Family Service Coordinator acts as the single point of contact for coordinating those services, which include occupational, physical, speech language, nursing, nutrition services, etc. Last year, the Kansas legislature approved an increase for the Medicaid rate for targeted case management. Family Service Coordination is the same service as that TCM service under a different name. FSC was supposed to be included in the increase last year, but was inadvertently left out. And we believe legislators would have known at the time they would have included the FSC with the TCM rate increase. FSC is even billed, in case you didn't know this fact, but it's billed as the same code as the TCM. No one I've talked to or that we have found that can remember the last time that FSC rate was increased. The current reimbursement rate is $10.60 a unit, which is 15 minutes. Last year, the TCM rate was increased to $18.75 a unit. And this rate increase would result in Rainbows being able to bill approximately $100,000 more annually. And when you project that total increase for all Kansas infant toddler networks, it's estimated to be about a $600,000 to $700,000 increase in revenue statewide. I respectfully ask that you correct the unintended oversight from last year and increase the rate for family service coordination as you did for targeted case management last year. Thank you so much for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Questions for Lindsay? I don't see any at this time.
Thank you.
Next, we have Carol Bradford, Wyandotte Care. There we go. You were on the list. I was on a list. On a list.
Yeah. There we go. Chair McGinn, Senators, thank you for having me. My name is Carol Bradford. I am with Wyandotte Care, and I'm here to also represent our sister agencies in Sedgwick County and Shawnee County, Project Access Wichita, and Health Access Topeka. All of our organizations, we're nonprofit organizations, and all of us procure and coordinate donated health care to people who fall in the Medicaid gap, people who are low income, without insurance, cannot qualify for Medicare, Medicaid, VA benefits, other public or private health insurance. We focus on addressing serious medical conditions, heart disease, orthopedic conditions, cancer, joint replacement. We work with hospitals and individual medical providers to get them to donate care for people who cannot otherwise get really serious medical care. And then we coordinate that care for our patients. Since we were founded, we and our partners have served almost 47,000 patients, providing over $623 million in donated health care and over $12 million in prescription assistance and durable medical equipment. We ask that you maintain the Kansas Department of Health and Environment budget allocation of $550,000 to be distributed among our 3 agencies. Our programs do not have the capacity, or rather the option, for third-party billing for the services that we provide. We exist outside of insurance programs serving only the uninsured poor. I will say that for Wyandotte Care, about 90% of our working age patients work. What we do, we believe, is fundamental to keeping people working, caring for their families, putting a roof over their head, and food on the table. I know time is limited, but I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. I remember when this started, but I guess I thought that it was more for prescription assistance, and it looks like it's expanded to...
I think you're thinking of Medical Services Bureau in Wichita. It's affiliated, but that's a separate program. I'm not sure well, I'm originally from Wichita. I don't know where Medical Services Bureau. Project Access Wichita also does some prescription assistance and DME. You'd have to speak to Shelley Duncan, their executive, around the full scope of what they do. But a lot of it is Project Access, Health Access Topeka, and Wyjo Care have all been around since the early 2000s.
I just didn't realize it was so diversified, so.
It's a big program that they have down there.
Any other questions for Carol? All right, thank you, Carol.
All right, thank you.
Tanya Dorf Bruner, Executive Director, Oral Health, Kansas. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I almost said good morning, but it's not morning anymore. Thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you this afternoon. Again, my name is Tanya Dorf-Bruner. I'm the Executive Director of Oral Health Kansas. I appreciate Dennis Kriesel already previewing what I'm going to talk to you about today. I do want to start by just saying this committee has been a real champion of extending dental benefits in Medicaid to adults over the last couple of years. And last year in calendar 2023, over 7,500 people had access to restorative dental care, and that's because of you. So thank you for that. What I'm here today to talk about is an unintended consequence of how the benefits are set up. So Kansas is the only state that actually uses a combination of value-added benefits, which are the VABs, the Medicaid managed care organizations use, and the Medicaid program itself for adult dental services. We're the only state that does that combination. Of course, the purpose of a value-added benefit is to offer additional services or some kind of an incentive or enhancement that can promote healthy lifestyles or improve health outcomes. So it should really be something extra, but in this case, it's covering the basic, most direct dental services there are, which are exams and cleanings. So in our process over the last year to get word out to providers and consumers about the new Medicaid coverage for restorative procedures and dentures, we've learned that the benefit is just not working quite as well as it was planned. Of course, we all know it's not easy for dental offices to decide to become Medicaid providers, and we know that any barrier can kind of stop them from even trying. We also are seeing that even providers that already see kids covered by Medicaid are having a hard time taking the leap to see adults, mostly because it's just very complex to understand how each of the value-added benefits for each of the MCOs works for each of the patients, and then how that works with the Medicaid dental services themselves. So as we've been promoting the adult dental coverage to providers, we've been hearing this over and over again. Dental providers have said to us, it is necessary, those are the words they've used, it's just necessary at this point to move those exams and cleanings and x-rays from the value-added benefits to the Medicaid state plan. So essentially streamlining the Medicaid benefits will make it just a lot easier for providers to see adults. And to that point, last year, the state of Maryland actually implemented a Medicaid dental benefit for adults. It did include exams, cleanings, x-rays. That in the first 11 months of their benefit in 2023, they had a utilization rate of 23%. And in all of 2023, we had a utilization rate of closer to 4%, like the number 4. So the difference is really, really striking, and we think it underscores the value of eliminating confusion on how dental services are covered in our state. There are over 40 states do cover basic preventive dental care for adults, including all of our neighboring states. And you'll see in my testimony, it's nearly 24 statewide and local organizations are joining with us to advocate for this Medicaid coverage of basic preventive dental care. So you've also got written testimony from the Kansas Dental Association and from consumers and providers who are saying this confusion is something that they really need to see if it can get addressed. So as Dennis said, we are asking the committee to include $4.8 million in all funds, and including $1.9 million SGF in the KDHE budget to cover dental exams, x-rays, and cleanings for adults in the Medicaid program. It's a very specific dollar amount that's actually in my testimony, but essentially it's $4.8 million all funds. Before I wrap up, I also just want to say quickly, there's some testimony, written testimony from my colleague, Dr. Mary Ann Lynch-Small, that you have about sedation dental care access, which is a real challenge, and we're doing a lot of work around that. But in the interest of time, we just wanted to point it out as a written testimony, but she is on WebEx in case there are questions about that you're interested in asking her. So thank you for the chance to visit with you today, and happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Tanya. Questions for Tanya? Dan? Or Senator, sorry, Kirshen. The old farm thing comes back to me. Dan, I don't think you're on.
Okay, sorry about that.
It's okay.
But since you brought up sedation dentistry, I know that's an area that everybody walks away from, or what's the prediction and where we go with that?
So that's actually, and if my colleague Marianne is, if that'd be okay, Madam Chair, yeah, Marianne, if you're available, she's got some details about how, she can see me looking at the screen. We've got some details about some of the work we're trying to preview. We think we're gonna come back in the future and say, we've done enough analysis and now here's what we think we need, but we don't think we know enough yet. That's the short version. And she outlines some more details in her testimony. Yeah.
So we have her testimony?
You do, you do. It looks a little bit like mine, but it's only 1 page as opposed to like 3 or 4 for me.
Are you good, Senator?
And I'm happy to follow up with you, Senator, with some more details. I would love to follow up with you. Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We just don't want the last conferee saying, good evening, Senators. All right, next we have Sean Sullivan, Midland Care.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be quick. With Midland Care, one of the services lines we provide is hospice services in 19 counties in Northeast Kansas, and we provide hospice services to patients' homes, also in an inpatient unit we call our hospice house here in Topeka, and then also in facilities. And then we also are a co-owner and partner with 13 retirement communities in Harvey, Reno, McPherson, Marion, and Saline counties for a hospice that we started last year called Community Care Hospice that does serve nursing homes. We have been working with a number of other hospices for 8-10 months to try to figure out alternative ways to a long-standing Medicaid reimbursement issue that's a bit of an oddity in the hospice world or in Medicaid reimbursement world. If you have my written testimony in front of you, I want to just quickly cover pages 3 and 4 of that. Very colorful chart I can't take credit for, but it is some of the better work that I've ever provided testimony for in front of budget committees. But as it is now, if a nursing facility or nursing home resident is not on hospice, then it's fairly simple. The nursing home bills their Medicaid daily rate, room and board rate to the state and to CanCare. The managed care company pays 100% of that rate back to the nursing home. Oversimplifying that, but that is essentially the process. That happens today for a patient in a nursing home, not on hospice. Then on page 4, tomorrow, if end-of-life care is needed and prescribed and agreed to and the benefit is signed, then there's 2 different systems that occur. The first is on the Medicare side, assuming the person has Medicare as a primary coverage. We as a hospice bill Medicare. We are paid based on the federal rate schedule and the level of care provided to the patient, and we receive 100% of that rate from Medicare in a fairly seamless system. However, on the Medicaid side, unlike today, the nursing home stops billing CanCare, and the hospice bills CanCare instead for the Medicaid nursing home daily rate. And we bill for that facility's daily rate. So if that's $300 a day, we bill CanCare $300 a day. The managed care company or the state then pays the hospice 95% of what we bill. So we get paid $285 a day for the nursing facility rate. And then we then go and pay the nursing home 100% of their rate or $300 a day. So the hospice receives essentially a 5% haircut, discount, whatever we want to call it. So we absorb that 5% loss on every Medicaid patient that we serve. We still do get the Medicare reimbursement, again, if there's primary Medicare coverage, but receive that $15 a day loss for Medicaid. That long has been considered kind of a cost of doing business, of losing that 5%. But as a downstream effect of nursing homes having their rates increase significantly over the last couple of years, it's become increasingly more difficult for hospices to absorb that 5% and is significantly impacting our business. So we would request consideration to eliminate that 5% discount. We received data from KDHE last summer, which was 2022 data, that 5% discount would have cost $1.9 million all funds, $738,000 SGF. Those numbers would need to be updated by KDHE, KLRD, whoever would be able to do that for the most up-to-date estimate would likely be around that amount. So our ask are, number one, appropriate funds in that amount to eliminate that 5% discount to hospices for Medicaid and facilities. And secondly, because likely will not be as simple as requesting or making that change to a state plan amendment from KDHE to CMS for KDHE to work with hospice and nursing home stakeholders to implement that to new payments and systems as CMS requires. So thank you for your time. Happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Questions for Sean? I don't see any. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian Williams, President and CEO of Labette Health. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Committee members, thank you for allowing me to be here today with you. I know you're extremely busy, so I'll be brief. Rural emergency hospitals came into legislation or licensure in the state of Kansas beginning in January of 2023, also at the federal level. Senator Moran introduced at the end of December a Rural Emergency Hospital Adjustment Act, which would allow hospitals to reopen that were closed back to 2015. Under consideration in the current legislature in Kansas is House Bill 2637 that would allow that to occur in Kansas. I provided, I'm not sure if you have them, but in front of you, there's a folder like this, and a picture's worth 1,000 words. So there's a picture for you of what we were able to construct in, it opened July 4th, 2017 in Independence, Kansas. Rural emergency hospitals didn't exist at that time, so we've funded this ourselves, and our ask and our request is that the committee would consider bridge funding for those hospitals that have essentially operated rural emergency hospitals since 2015 without the funds to do that. I also provided on the right-hand side, that's our actual loss of direct operations from that facility in 2023. So we've operated it at a $500,000 deficit on a standalone basis in Independence, Kansas. In that picture on the left is a off-campus emergency room, 8,000 square feet, sees on average 7,000 patients a year. On the right is a cancer infusion center and a rural health clinic. So I know our wants are many and our resources are few, but I hope you would consider that. And subject to your questions.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Help me understand the difference between what you're showing your picture that you said you paid for and the hospitals that are being built like in Concordia and Kiowa County, and they're all being federally funded.
Sure. So prior to January 2023, there were PPS hospitals that basically are paid here's your payment from the federal government to treat a Medicare patient, and you have to operate within those expenses. Then there's critical access hospitals that get cost-based funding. So I imagine those facilities were critical access hospitals. Rural emergency hospital, essentially the government's paying $3.2 million for you to give up your inpatient beds and provide a model that's probably sustainable for smaller rural communities, which would be outpatient services and an emergency hospital. And Kansas, interestingly enough, participated in a 5-state pilot. One of the hospitals in southeast Kansas participated and helped it become law. Did that answer your question, Madam Chairwoman? Sorta.
A little bit, because you're talking about the hospitals that have closed since 2015, and this would allow them to reopen. Is that what I heard?
Only as a rural emergency hospital. It would give them the opportunity to sustain. So Fort Scott's the best example. Ascension went into that community when the hospital had closed, reopened it essentially as a rural emergency hospital. That has since closed, and that's, I think, why we're asking for the bridge funding.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions, Senator Petty?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for being here. So included within the governor's recommendations is funding for as a Medicaid expansion, so drawing down the funds from the federal government for that. So how would that impact your Labette Health?
It would help Labette Health in a positive way. Medicaid expansion would. I'm not going to deny that. But today, my only ask, because that's a political hot potato, and I don't.
I know, but we're talking about health care. And we're
so healthcare is
healthcare with state general funds when we could be pulling down federal dollars. So I have to ask that question.
I know you do,
you're
Senator.
in the business.
Thank you. It's a couple $1 million that would help us. So Labette Health had a $2 million operating loss last year. Prior to COVID, we had a $5 million bottom line. We're a community asset, so the shareholders are the people of Southeast Kansas. So we reinvested in facilities like this. We reinvested in rural health clinics to provide delivery of health care. So any added dollars is going to help a hospital right now. 70% of the hospitals in the state of Kansas have a negative operating margin. We're at a point where it's not sustainable. But I've heard many other people this morning and today say they have their needs. So your job's not an easy one. But yes, Medicaid expansion would help.
You have that $2 million, how much of that was that uncompensated care, or that was just a variety?
Oh, so our uncompensated care and costs of charity care last year was $9 million negative loss.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I think we can get one or two more in before we get kicked out. Cindy Seisman, Executive Director, Kansas Chapter, American Academy of Pediatrics. There she is. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chair McGinn and committee members. I am Denise Sisman. I'm the Executive Director of the Kansas Chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. And I want to thank you for allowing me today to request higher Medicaid rates for pediatric care. You have my full testimony. It has a lot of information and detail as to why we believe that this is important. We are proposing allocating $1.7 million in state general funds, $4.16 million all funds, in order to enhance the rates for well child, sick visits, and vaccine administration and counseling. You'll hear, I think, in a little bit later today that the KMS is also proposing a 10% increase in Medicaid rates across multiple outpatient codes, and we are in full support of that. This request, though, is above and beyond that because we think that focusing on pediatric rates is going to be really good and the best for Medicaid as well as for Kansas children and families, and here's why. The majority of CanCare beneficiaries are children. So you heard earlier, 61% of Medicaid enrollees are kids. We also know that they provide a really good return on investment. You also heard earlier that less than 1/4 of all the Medicaid expenses are related to children's health care. They're also a good return on investment as well, because if you raise healthy children, they grow up to be healthy and productive adults. And so really investing in healthcare for those that are young provides you all and me and all other Kansans with the greatest opportunity for getting the biggest return on investment. We do want to also acknowledge that 2 years ago, this body, the legislature, increased Medicaid rates for well child visits, about $900,000 state general funds, about $2 million all funds, and that was and is greatly appreciated. We're now coming back, though, and really specifically what I'd like to talk about today are the sick visits. And on page 4 of your testimony, there will be a chart that shows you what the current Medicaid rates are for the sick visits in comparison to Medicare. It's the same type of service, sick visit for adult, senior on Medicare, sick visit for children. There's a tremendous amount of difference there you can see. And what we're looking for is Medicare parity, basically equivalent. The $1.7 million that we're asking for comes from a fiscal note from KDHE that I believe has the increased rate at 90% of Medicaid. Of Medicare. And so I just want to do a little bit of the math, especially to help you put into context the 10% increase request from KMS. So if you look at code 99213, and I think it's about halfway down the page, it's going to be a sick visit for an established patient, low to moderate severity. This might be a child with asthma, a child with diabetes. It could be also a child that is there for depression. The rate is $40.84. If you add the 10% increase, which is what KMS is asking for, and again, we are in full support of that, that would bring that rate up to $44.92. Still very different from the $85.09 that you receive from Medicare. So we do believe that as we're looking for more pediatricians to serve more children with Medicaid, that moving us closer to that Medicare rate is going to be essential. You can also see on page 5, if you want to look at the surrounding states, that we are also much lower for all of those rates. If you look at that particular code of 99213, low to moderate severity, they're ranging anywhere between $75 and $84. So we are going to be asking you to consider the increased, or consider the 1.7 million allocation in addition to the 10% increase, which we are fully supportive. And I stand for questions.
All right, I don't see any. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to get one more in. Sean Gatewood. Is Sean here? Well, you got good ears. You're up.
That was some timing there. Yes, ma'am, I will be brief. Thank you for having me, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Sean Gatewood. I represent the Cane Care Advocates Network. We're a pretty vast community of folks that have disabilities, serve those with disabilities, and advocate for those with disabilities, and are served by the Medicaid program across the state. I come to you today to ask that you retain the funding for Medicaid expansion in the budget. And the reason I felt compelled to come today on that particular issue is because the people with disabilities have been kind of used as an excuse not to expand over the last couple of years. And so my advocates asked me to come today and say, you know, that the vast consensus of the disability community in Kansas supports expansion for a variety of reasons that are outlined in my testimony. And I'll just leave it at that. I'll answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Sean. And since I've put somebody else on the hot seat already, hospital, and I'm not putting you because you're an advocate for it. But so I see on here that you have this lengthy list of how expanding Medicaid, Medicaid, sorry, would impact the disability community. Is there any negative? I'm not. But I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is there?
Well, so the negative that's put forward is that, you know, this somehow puts folks that would be in the expansion population in line ahead of those with disabilities because we have the existing waiting lists that are out there. And the folks with disabilities that are on those waiting lists right now, they, by definition, get the health insurance side that would be extended to this new population. The legislature has always had the ability to fund the wait lists and to work toward elimination of those wait lists at any given time. So to us, that comparison would be the exact same as saying that, you know, highway transportation funding or something like that would be in the same competition for Medicaid expansion or for Medicaid dollars as the expansion versus the wait list, if that makes sense.
Thank you. And so, so in essence, what you're saying that with Medicaid expansion, we actually would have more state dollars to put towards the reduction of the wait list, or we could?
Could potentially, and again, you know, as we're trying to kind of build, the state really kind of created a class within folks that, and it's sort of a separate topic. Those that serve people with disabilities, most of the time they're sort of, the state has made them be independent contractors. So they're an employee of the person with the disability. And so when they're moving from person to person every day, they're not getting paid as they're going between and all of that. They're fairly low wage workers. When we're trying to build that capacity to care for those folks and to draw down those lists, being able to provide health insurance for them would be important. And it's not otherwise provided in many cases.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Sean? All right, I was going to try to push it a little bit more, but I hear utilities is outside the door, so. I know, but they always want to set up. But I could ask April if she's going to stick to the 3-minute rule, and if she is, we'll let her go. All right, thank you.
I'm April Holman with the Alliance for Healthy Kansas. We are an organization that is centered around increasing access to affordable health care. For many years, we've been working to pass the expansion of Medicaid eligibility in Kansas. Really, what I wanted to talk with you about more than anything is just to ask you to leave the funding in the budget while we have a chance to work on expansion throughout the session. Senator Gossage has said, announced in her committee, that there will be a hearing. We don't know when it's going to be. It hasn't happened yet. So I think it would be premature at this point, and even possibly a symbol of bad faith if the money was taken out before we were able to have that hearing and have that day to explain our case. So with that, I would thank you and offer to stand for questions.
Questions for April? All right, thank you. You did a
Thank
great
you.
job. All right. Just pay attention to the announcements after we get on the floor, and then you'll know what time we're going to get started again. At this time, we're going to recess till around 3:30.